but it's, again, it just tells the story of it's the evil and the ugliness of people's hearts these days is everywhere.
This is Frankie Rose's Think Tank. Here's your host, Frankie Rose.
Hey there, friends. Well, welcome to the Think Tank. We're going to hop right into this, and this is a press conference after the failure of the Creech execution. Stretch that out a little bit. Hopefully it helps me with the powers that be. Okay, here we go, guys. I know it's fast and right into it, but let's do this.
They did their level best, successful. They did the right thing and opted to stop additional efforts so that we could evaluate next steps. With that, I will stop for a moment and allow the other witnesses to speak to their particular experiences, and then I'm happy to answer any questions after that.
We missed the first part. Wasn't there?
Hello, I'm Rebecca Boone. I'm a correspondent with the Associated Press. I'll attempt to do sort of a minute-by-minute recount of what we saw so that you can understand what happened. Let's see. So the media witnesses were brought into the witness room at 9:50 this morning. We were in there with several other people, including Hayden Dodds from the Board of Correction, Jared Larson from the governor's office. There was a correctional officer in there with us, and Ada County Sheriff Shepherd. At 9:55, it sounded to me as if perhaps Mr. Creech's witnesses were being brought into the room. Just so you understand, that it is a separate witness room and we are not able to see them. They have their own window into the execution chamber. So what we can see when we sit in there is the execution chamber itself, which has a padded sort of medical style table with straps on it, a podium where the warden stands, two phones, one red, one black, and then in the walls there are some holes where the IV tubing goes into the medication room or the medical team room, which is actually behind the execution chamber and is not visible to us. The medical team apparently views Mr. Creech throughout the process, the ones that aren't in the execution room, via some closed circuit cameras, I think, and I saw 2 cameras or 3 cameras above the medical table itself. So that is where I presume they were viewing the events. At 9:59 this morning, I heard some faint pounding from outside our room. It's not clear what that pounding was. It sounded like somebody sort of rhythmically banging on metal. I do not know what that sound was. It lasted for a few minutes and then stopped. At 10 a.m., the warden and the director and some correctional officers entered the execution room, followed almost immediately by the escort team, which was 6 people escorting Mr. Creech in. He was already on a gurney. They brought him in, they moved him via a backboard to the execution table and then began strapping him down, first his right arm, then his left. He seemed he was not moving much during this process. He wasn't fidgeting. The escort team was standing at attention when they weren't actively strapping him down. And that placement of him on the table was complete by 10:03. Once he was on the table, he was looking at people in his witness area, which was adjacent to ours, and appeared to be talking or mouthing some things. At 10:04, about the medical team began assessing his veins and applying an EKG to his chest to monitor his heart rate. And they took several steps to sort of prepare his right arm for access to the IV. They used devices, including like a laser device or an infrared device, a vein finder tool. They used a hot compress. They attached a blood pressure cuff that they inflated to try to get the veins to distend. So by about 10:11, They began trying to establish the first IV, and within 2 minutes at 10:13, they decided the first IV attempt was unsuccessful. They again tried a new site. Each IV step took several steps, right? So they would clean the skin, they would inject a numbing agent, they would re-clean the skin, and then they would attempt to insert the IV itself. Excuse me. IVs continued to be attempted in each arm first. So they tried the right arm first, they tried the hand, they tried the left arm, both sides, and then they decided that they needed to move to his legs. And at that point, they removed the sheet that was covering his legs, took off his orange, like slide-on style shoes, pulled up his green scrub style pants, and then worked around the hook and loop style straps that were restraining both of his ankles. At that point, they moved the medical cart that they were using to hold their supplies to near Mr. Creech's feet, so it would be next to where they were working. This obscured our view partially, and we were unable to see exactly how many attempts directly that they were trying. However, based on the number of times they inflated the cuff and used numbing agents, our count was also 8 attempts. Let's see. So by 10:43, they were still, at 10:41, they were still attempting to find IV sites. At that point, one of the medical team members opened a drawer in the cart, appeared to see that they were running low on supplies. That person left the room, came back with the pocket of his sort of scrub style navy blue jacket filled with supplies. When he left, Director T. Walt followed him briefly out of the room and also came back quickly. And that medical team member made an additional trip out to get, I think, one more thing. The supplies were then restocked. They were still attempting repeatedly throughout the next several minutes. At 10:54, Mr. Creech lifted his head, looked at the medical team and said, "My legs hurt a bit." At that point, they appeared to try to like lift or move his legs to apparently relieve some of that discomfort. Throughout this process, Mr. Creech was looking at the people in his witness room. He was sometimes, his arms were strapped, but he was sometimes waving like this or waggling, like wagging his fingers at them. He was sometimes mouthing things to them, but he wasn't saying anything loud enough that we could hear it. At 10:57, Warden Richardson and Director T. Walt spoke to each other quietly, nodded, and then the warden went and spoke to the medical team. Also at that time, the medical team began removing the EKG. They left by 10:58, and that's when Warden Richardson announced that the execution would be halted because of the inability to find a successful IP site. We were taken out of the room a short time later. Before we left, I saw Director Richardson walk over to Mr. Creech. At one point, he placed his hand on his arm. He whispered to him quietly. Then he moved around to the other side of Mr. Creech where he was. The table so that his back was to the windows and appeared to be talking with him. Mr. Creech nodded back. When the warden announced that the execution would be halted, Mr. Creech looked at the people in his in the separate room, his witnesses, and waved at them again, and then sort of closed his eyes and shook his head.
Hi, I'm Brenda with KTVB. Rebecca did a great job explaining minute by minute, but I'm going to start with when he was brought in that gurney. It started on time. It started at 10 o'clock. He was brought in that gurney. He was still strapped in that gurney, and then he was lifted and put on the table, and they covered him with a white blanket. At 10:03, that's when he made eye contact with his family. He waved or to his witnesses on that room there. He waved, and again, like Rebecca mentioned, you could just see his fingers move there. But he was locked in with his family at 10:03. At 10:03, that is. At 10:04, he actually made contact with us to see who the other witnesses were. He didn't really he didn't say anything. He didn't mumble. He just looked at us and then just laid back down. That's when the medical team started the process. They took some breathing assessment. They all chest and then 2 on his abdomen. I did catch at 10:06. He throughout this whole entire process, he would mumble words, but I was able to catch what he said at 10:06. Looking at his family, it appeared that he said, "I'm sorry." Looking at his family again. At 10:10, that's when the first IV was administered, and like Rebecca mentioned, it started at the right arm, went over to the left one, and then they had to go take off his shoes and proceed with his legs. This happened 8 times. Through each time, though, I did notice that Creech, every time the IV was administered, he would make this snoring noise. He would also twitch. It appeared that he would go in and out of his sleep. And yeah, like I mentioned, he would twitch and then snore. There was another point at 10:32 where I was able to make out what he was saying to his witness room there. It appears that he said, "I love you." This was after a couple of attempts at administering the IV. After that, he went to that again to the noises, the snoring noises, and the twitching that he would do. I will also mention, kind of backtracking here, in the room, the medical staff, they were covered in white cloth. They also had goggles. And there was about 3 of them administering this IV. There was a point, the 7th time, when the IV was administered at 10:54, like Rebecca mentioned, he did say, "My legs hurt a bit." That's when the medical staff helped him lift his legs up. I will also note that from what I could see, from my point of view, he didn't seem like he was in pain. The only time that he really said he was at 10:54 when he said, again, quote, "My legs hurt a bit." Then after that moment, he shook his head. He would shake his head sometimes. I'm just looking at his family. At 10:58, that's when the execution was halted. That's when it was announced. They couldn't find, they weren't able to have any successful attempts. So that's when it was halted. We were actually told to leave the room. Creech was still laying there on the table. And when that announcement was made, from my point of view, he was looking up and mumbling a couple of words. I didn't make that out, but he would just look up to the roof and just mumble a couple words there. After that, we were escorted, but he was told a couple of words that we also weren't able to hear, but then we left the room.
I'm Scott McIntosh from the Idaho Statesman. I don't have much to add. I will corroborate what Rebecca Boone said and what Brenda Rodriguez said. I also, when Mr. Creech came into the room, he looked back at his witness room and his eyes started to fill with tears, and I heard him sniffling, and he seemed to be puffing a little bit. And I will also say that I could not hear what Mr. Creech said, but based on his lips moving, it looked like he said, "I'm sorry." So I will confirm that. The only other thing I'll add is that the medical staff, there were 3 of them. There was 1 head person and 2 assistants. They were dressed in blue scrubs head to toe, and their faces were covered completely, except for their eyes, with white cloth. And then their eyes were covered with safety goggles, safety glasses. There was one moment when they were trying to put an IV in his right hand that it seemed like his hand was twitching and hurting. Other than that, I will also confirm that it did not seem that he was in discomfort or pain during that hour-long process. Other than that, I'll stand for questions.
I'm Roland Barris from Idaho News 6, KIVI-TV, ABC. The other witnesses have given a really good rundown of everything that pretty much happened. I guess I want to just add a little bit of perspective from what a bizarre circumstance this is for anyone to go witness. I think going into the room, seeing someone lifted off of a gurney onto an execution table is just surreal. And then to see the operators in the room, who, in my opinion, were very professional. Again, Creech, to me, did not look like he was in pain at any time, any severe pain, mild discomfort, I might say, from time to time. But it is bizarre also to see, as you described, the medical techs with cap on, goggles, face mask, pretty much covered almost head to toe. It's a strange sort of thing to see. At one point, they covered him with a white sheet, and it was kind of bizarre to see how it was almost like when you unfurl a flag of some sort, and they did it with a flourish almost. And then he was covered with a white sheet. And I guess I would say just lastly, as time went by and the attempts continued to fail, at first there was very clear communication from the techs, Mr. Creech, this IV attempt has failed. You could sense the frustration in the room as time went along. And I think I timed it, I don't know about you guys, maybe somewhere around 46, 47 minutes total from the time of the first one, IV. Somewhere around there, 45 to 47 minutes. It's a long time. About 57 you have? Sure. So understandably, I think you could see there was some frustration in the room a little bit as they tried to get more equipment in and try again. And I guess I would leave it open to question now, since there's probably going to be some other questions, whether or not there is a certain number that you decide to call it at, or is it just left up to the medical folks to handle that?
Yeah, real quick, just a couple things to add context. When Mr. Creech noted discomfort with his leg, he was experiencing a cramp, and the medical team worked to try to assuage that. I wasn't sure how briefed everybody was on the timeline, but Mr. Creech spent the entirety of the evening up until about 4:45 this morning with his attorneys as well as his wife, Leanne. He took a mild sedative, as he's afforded to do per policy, and actually was able to sleep for at least a little bit prior to this morning's event. So I think there was, as noted, he was very tired when he was brought into the execution chamber. In terms of a set number of attempts, we rely on the direction of our medical team. I met with them after Mr. Creech had a physical examination this morning. We had established that we thought there were potentially 8 access points. Those are the points they attempted to access. And when it became clear that that wasn't going to be successful, that's when the execution was halted. One other thing to note, the medical team leader did leave the room to gather additional supplies. After the assessment this morning, they had opted to look at smaller gauge catheters to try to establish IV access. And so it was to get additional smaller gauge catheters for their continued attempts. So with that, any additional questions?
I want to clarify that the state isn't sure what the next steps kind of look like moving forward.
Yeah, I think what we've established right now is that we have a death warrant that expires today. I know, and I apologize, I've been debriefing in some other things, so I'm not as up to speed on the legal maneuvering that's taken place, but I believe we have stipulated that we will not make further attempts on this death warrant to try to carry it out. But in terms of establishing when to seek another death warrant or if to seek another death warrant, I think those are discussions that have to happen in the days ahead to, number one, determine whether or not circumstances will be different. So those are the kind of things, those are the kind of discussions that it would be premature to say this is going to happen next until we have the benefit of having those discussions.
In terms of the state protocols, does anything plan for this sort of thing?
No, from a protocol standpoint, we have the preferred method is to establish a peripheral line. And that's what they attempted to do and finding those access sites. We have concerns about secondary methods that, this isn't, I think it's worth noting that this isn't emergency medicine. This is a heavily regulated process that requires it be treated with a deference to being mindful of not violating the Eighth Amendment or creating any cruel and unusual punishment type claims. So where there are other medical procedures that would require surgical intervention or something of that nature, there are some policies that in other states that allow for that. We're not comfortable with that at this point. But those are the types of things that we're going to be evaluating in the days ahead to try to determine the path forward.
As a follow-up on that question, another state, Alabama, had used nitrogen gas when the same thing didn't. Or is that an option for Idaho?
At this point, Idaho law provides for execution by lethal injection or firing squad now. We do not have the facilities or physical capabilities of carrying out firing squad. And we'll continue to work on those efforts. But state law doesn't allow for nitrogen hypoxia, so it would take a change in statute for that to be an option. But again, our efforts have been focused on carrying out the death penalty under the methods that are prescribed under state law today.
Director, is there a time factor with medication that is involved in this? As you seek a new death warrant, is there any concern that it expires or there's a problem with the medication holding up until another attempt?
No concerns. I mean, our policies are pretty strict in that, we have certain standards in place to ensure that the chemicals that we use are in fact the chemicals we're supposed to use, that they're not, that we're not using anything with a beyond view state, and that we have testing to verify the authenticity of those chemicals. And so that it is the same consideration for any execution we undertake. So today's events won't change the calculus on that.
There is a timeline though where it does go bad. It does have an expiration
at some point. Yeah, absolutely. But again, our decision making is based on our ability to carry out an execution with dignity, professionalism, and respect, not dates on chemicals. That's a secondary issue.
Can you walk us through whether or not the drugs were actually loaded in syringes and whether or not they have now been used and no longer future potential execution?
Yeah, in accordance with our policy, prior to Mr. Creech entering the chamber, our policy prescribes that we have trays that are prepared. So the chemicals that we had for today's execution are they're unusable in future executions.
All 3 doses, if you have a backup to the backup.
2 of the 3.
2 of the 3. So
Yep.
those, so one of those that is available.
Potentially, yeah. There was one in the back.
That was my question. Oh, I just wanted to make sure, Creech is not offered a chance to say final word, that's the idea was never established, is that correct?
Correct. We did not get to a place in the process where he was afforded that opportunity.
When you say he had physical examination this morning, does that have to do with assessing his veins?
Correct. Yeah, the purpose of that examination was for our medical team to assess their likelihood of being able to establish IV access. And as I was just going to say, and as I noted before, it wasn't a simple access issue. It was also a quality issue. And in their professional judgment, and I wholeheartedly agree with it, it would not have been appropriate to try to move forward with a potential with an IV site that is collapsed or with infiltration. So,
Following up on the backup and so forth, in order to carry out an execution, you would need a backup dose, future potential execution, correct?
correct.
Okay, so 2 have been used, and our doctors then have 1 in its possession currently.
Correct, but again, I'm not going to speculate on chemicals for future executions. I think we have a high level of confidence that we'll be able to secure the chemicals necessary to carry out an execution by lethal injection. But we'll cross that bridge when it's in front of us.
But you're talking about acquisition of additional chemicals. Is that from the same supplier where these ones came from?
I will speak about our supplier as often as I always speak about our supplier, and that's to say that I won't speak about our supplier.
Fair enough, but is our understanding correct that you do expect that you'll have to seek out new chemicals for another execution attempt?
Correct.
Okay.
You said that there were 8, so solidified 8 attempts. I think. Maybe you forgot. Somebody else asked a question. And that was because there were 8 established possible injections.
Correct.
Okay. Is Mr. Creech's wife and his patient still there? You know, he's back in his cell where they will have time together afterwards?
Yeah, we as I was leaving IMSI, we were in the process of moving Mr. Creech from F block to medical so that his wife could go back and visit him. And then the facility's making preparations right now on his longer term placement. I have not had the conversation with him after it failed. Warden Richardson has a good rapport with Mr. Creech, and he and the warden had a conversation. I'm not aware of the contents of that conversation.
You acknowledge that this execution was unsuccessful. You said it was wrong to call it a failure. Mr. Creech's attorneys have referred to this as a botched execution. How do you respond?
Well, I'll respond to Mr. Creech's attorneys in court, but I think from a broader context, you know, what's clear to us and what we rehearse and practice and train is that everything we do is with the goal in mind of ensuring that this process is carried out with dignity, professionalism, and respect. And when it reaches a point in that process at any step where it looks like we're going to be unable to do that, that's when we call it off. And so I think for us, it wasn't a difficult decision. It was the right decision to halt any future attempts at trying to establish IV access. Let's call it, and we'll discuss next steps after that. So I think, you know, what is, you know, that's, again, our goal is to do this in a manner befitting the gravity of such an occasion, and attempting to try to move forward with an execution when you don't have the confidence it can be carried out in that respect, I think that would be the definition of a botched execution.
Director T-Wall. Could you walk us through the level of medical training qualified members on the medical team? Are they phlebotomists? Are they EMTs?
Yeah, I won't get into the specific medical qualifications, except to say that the requirements to be a member of our medical team are clearly spelled out in our SOP, which is publicly available. And there are regular checks to ensure that they maintain their certifications. I'll go above and beyond that, as I noted before, as a demonstration of our confidence in their competence in what they do. Every single person who's involved in this execution planning process has volunteered to have IVs established by this medical team. So while they were unable to establish a suitable IV access point today, our confidence in them is unwavering.
We have two more questions. Okay, mine's kind of a double one. So as far as you know, this has never happened in the state of Idaho before?
Correct.
Okay, and has anybody on the medical team ever performed an execution before?
Yes.
Yeah, in Idaho?
Correct.
Okay, so they have history.
But just one last question then. I've always heard that when you're under attack, if you will, your veins shut down because the external veins will sort of collapse in order to protect you from attack. It's a natural thing that occurs. It doesn't make it problematic when you're fearful for your life that you're about to die, that the veins will be difficult to find.
You are asking me to weigh into an area where I have zero expertise. So I mean, I can't necessarily comment on that respect, except to note, the qualifications that are in our SOP. These medical team members are, as a routine course of their work, are used to dealing in high stress, high pressure, high stakes situations. Again, we're confident in their abilities, but I can't speak to how the circumstances may have affected Mr. Creech or the quality of his veins today.
And the media, do you want to We appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Hey guys, so what do you think of that? What do you think of that? Unreal. Absolutely unreal. Well, we've got another stream coming up in a little over a half hour. Brian Koberger has got a hearing, so we will check that out as well. So, guys, thanks for stopping by. It was a fast one, but not so fast for Creech. All right, guys, I will see you very soon in the next one.